There's a specific kind of intellectual dominance. Taking your opponent's exact rules and using them to prove their worldview is a strict mathematical contradiction. In the early 12th century, decades before the formal University of Paris was established, the city was a fierce, hyper-competitive market for philosophers. Masters rented out quarters and battled to attract students and prestige. The undisputed king of this environment was Peter Abelard, a philosopher who built a massive following entirely on the nominalist approach to logic. But his dominance attracted a primary rival, Alberic of Paris. Alberic was the leader of a competing faction known as the Albercani, and a strict realist determined to dismantle Abelard's framework. This rivalry reached far beyond an academic spat. Alberic's relentless attack on Abelard triggered a crisis that permanently changed the history of logical consequence. To understand the trap Alberic set, we have to look at Abelard's nominalism. Abelard treated logic primarily as a science of words. For him, logic governed the syntactic and linguistic relationships between terms, rather than actual physical objects. This linguistic focus led Abelard to establish a strict relevance requirement for conditional statements. He called this concept containment. Under the rule of containment, a conditional statement is only true if the first part, the antecedent, strictly requires and metaphysically contains the second part, the consequent. Abelard relied on a specific example, the statement, "If Socrates is a human, he is an animal." This statement is true because the concept of being an animal is firmly contained within the concept of being a human. The second pillar of Abelard's system was an inherited rule he fiercely defended, known as Boethius's theorem. Boethius's theorem is a logical law stating that no proposition can ever entail its own exact opposite. In other words, a statement can never prove its own negation. Abelard's unwavering faith in containment and Boethius's theorem created a highly rigid architecture. Alberic realized this rigidity could be weaponized. Alberic deployed a specific formal deduction to spring his trap. History remembers it as embarrassing argument 2, or EA2. This formal logic table tracks the proof. Alberic establishes line 1 using Abelard's own accepted premise. If Socrates is a man, which we will call P, he is an animal, which we will call Q. Next, Alberic introduces line 2 by applying simplification, a standard logical rule that allows you to extract a single claim from a compound statement. Translated into plain language, line 2 reads, "If Socrates is a man and is not an animal, Socrates is not an animal." Abelard is forced to accept these starting lines. They perfectly obey his own strict containment rules, deriving consequences directly from their antecedents. With the axiom set, Alberic introduces the logical manipulation of contraposition, the rule that lets you flip a conditional statement and negate both sides to turn the premises inward. He applies contraposition to line 1 to generate line 3. Line 3 now states, "If Socrates is not an animal, he is not a man." Alberic then uses the rule of transitivity to bridge line 2 and line 3 together. Transitivity is the rule dictating that if A implies B and B implies C, then A implies C. This generates the subconclusion line 3A, P and not Q implies not P. The math here is flawless. By simply following standard deduction rules on accepted premises, Alberic has successfully locked Abelard into a corner. Alberic triggers the final sequence of the trap. He simplifies and contraposes one last time. This generates line 4. P implies it is not the case that P and not Q. The final blow lands by applying transitivity one last time, chaining line 3A directly into line 4. This reveals the fatal conclusion of EA2, line 5. Read plainly, the proof concludes, if Socrates is a man and not an animal, it is not the case that Socrates is a man and not an animal. Look closely at the left and right side of this highlighted equation. It is a conditional that directly entails its exact opposite. This result is devastating. Because Abelard fiercely defends Boethius's theorem, a proposition entailing its opposite is supposed to be mathematically impossible. Yet Alberic just derived it using Abelard's own strict rules, proving the entire nominalist logic system is self-contradictory. Alberic weaponized this proof to clear the field for a new system, his own realist framework. To do that, he relied on a concept called thing predication, or predicatio rerum. This diagram shows predicatio rerum. Logic is not linguistic syntax, but a mapping of real physical objects. For realists, a predicate is a tangible thing. The category of human physically belongs to the entity of Socrates. Therefore, Alberic established a strict rule: a false putative predication, combining words that don't physically belong together, fails to express any logical connection whatsoever. Logic must be constrained by physical and metaphysical reality, otherwise it generates meaningless paradoxes. We can apply Alberic's rule of thing predication directly back to line 2 of the EA2 proof to see how he escapes his own trap. Look at the visual interaction here. There is a specific ontological incompatibility, which the Albercani called repugnantia, hidden in the phrase Socrates is not an animal. Because Socrates is necessarily human in the real world, he is necessarily an animal. Since these entities reject each other in physical reality, the conditional relation dissolves completely before the mathematical deduction even has a chance to begin. This deep metaphysical solution contrasts sharply with later 14th century logicians like John Buridan. Buridan avoided the crisis by making consequence purely truth-functional, basing logic strictly on true or false values, stripping the physical metaphysics out entirely. Alberic's embarrassing arguments proved that to build a coherent system of truth, you have to decide if your logic is just a set of linguistic rules, or if it is bound by the unyielding structure of reality itself.